what comes to mind might not be the right thing, but for me, it's figuring out what you're gonna do as you go along. So,
How would you capture that thought? Flexibility?
it's either less upfront planning,
Okay.
so.
Are you saying less work or just less?
No,
planning?
no, it's not less work, I think it's more work, honestly.
That's all, what you're saying is,
You jump into something and you haven't figured out all the details.
Okay.
and
okay,
So,
so. Less upfront work?
yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Good?
All I'm,
There we go.
maximizing value, that's,
Okay. Can you qualify value in terms of what's value?
the value of the product from the customer's perspective.
Okay. So maximize customer value. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Tim?
Got the one thing, the rapid, but quick, and you can see results soon.
Quick?
And also, what did I say, adaptable and dynamic, I guess.
Okay. Jonathan?
Adaptable, flexible, you can change on the fly, basically.
User stories to their focus is more on the user stories.
Okay. Anything else?
And the see results is the fact that you can see the demos, I guess, is part of the see
Yeah.
results.
Before
Yeah.
release, let's say?
Yeah.
Linda?
Same quick dynamic life process also.
Did you say light process?
Yeah, life process and.
I thought it was heavy.
And the user's voice much quicker.
Feedback?
Oh, okay. Okay. So, when we look at the list, it's really all elements of Agile, okay? And we're gonna take a look after, there are just a few things we can add to that, but really, you know, Agile focuses on understanding what the user wants, okay? And being able to respond, okay, quickly, okay, to maximize customer value. Okay. It's also a cycle. We saw that word, okay? We talked about adding features, okay? We talked about being adaptable. We also talked about being a light process, and within which we have feedback, and I would say quick feedback. So the Agile world is really what this is all about. It's being able to do certain things quickly, correctly, and knowing also when we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, so we can correct the situation, you know, as fast as possible. Let me plug in my technology here. look at the traditional process. For those who were here this week, you'll see that this is not quite what we saw in terms of details, but essentially it follows the same steps as the OPM. Okay. So this is a traditional product process, and what we're looking at in this case is we go from ideation, trying to get some creativity going about what could be solutions. Then we screen these solutions. We define what these solutions are. We develop a design or prototype. We develop a working model. We test it to the beta, and then we go on to production. That's really what the traditional model is. It's a step-by-step process. What we don't have here is on the left side, when we talk about the ideation, we don't have the customer input. Okay, we don't have the requirements. What is it the user wants? Okay, so at the other end, what we do is within this process is we stop talking about it once it's in production. So there's no product launch planning. It's really a process which is focused on research and development. Okay, so that's the traditional model. And within that, you can, like I just mentioned, have the launch planning, launch and support, all the other elements that relate to the marketing of the product, okay, is outside of that. This is all supported also by documentation. This documentation is the business case, the market requirement documentation. What is it the market is looking for? What is it customers are looking for? Then we have the product requirement documentation, which is basically how we're going to solve the problem, the technical side. And then we have the functional specifications, which support the solution for the customer. And then we have a full plan in terms of going out, testing the product, having a beta plan, getting the feedback, making corrections, preparing a marketing plan, and finally launching the product. Okay, but everything is supported in terms of documentation. It's also something that was, I would say, heavily marketed, but was promoted back in probably the early 1980s by a gentleman called Cooper. And some people refer to this as the Cooper approach, or the Cooper model, whereby you have different phases, and between the phases you have gates. And those gates basically are areas where you're going to take a decision. Those are decisions whether to go forward, to kill the project, to recycle to get more information, or put it aside for later use. Okay. So Mr. Cooper came out with this approach, and it became what we also know as the waterfall approach, or vice versa. The waterfall was still that he refined it to the point that it became a very, very structured model for development.
Was it called waterfall before Agile came?
Uh,
Or was waterfall a qualifier, a differentiator?
That's a good question. I'm not, I think the term, what I saw is that the term waterfall did show up, okay, once in a while. But when the agile solution was developed, all of a sudden they coined that term as the reference for that method. Okay. And Cooper is one of them that made a whole business around waterfall.
Yes.
Okay. And his method was really, promoted and used a lot.
Yes.
Okay. And this is what I was referring to when we talk about the gates. Whoops. About the gates. Okay. And, next level, you need to have completed the whole phase, and you need to get approval to move on to the other one. So it's the traditional approach. You were mentioning you worked in a waterfall traditional environment,
Yeah,
right?
we have 5 gates there.
Okay.
Props, I don't know if that's an internal Ericsson one or.
I think it's an internal flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's
Basically,
outside.
gate 1 and 2, somewhat, gate 1 and 2 are somewhat combined, and 2 and 3 are somewhat combined.
Yep.
Okay, so you basically split the project approval into.
So there are different flavors of the traditional process. And I've seen companies where their own flavor added, even more phases, but what they were doing is opening up those phases, and the actions required within that phase became a phase in itself. Okay. So they added gates, I guess it's to relieve insecurity maybe in certain environments. Okay. So, John, how about yourself?
Yeah, this is a model I'm very familiar with.
Okay.
The companies I've worked for have used some variation on this model. It's some things will shift around from company to company, but it's roughly the same.
Right. Now, so what we see is that there's a basic model, and then there are different flavors, okay? And companies tend to adapt this to their needs, but also the evolution of this thing sometimes is that it rarely is reduced in terms of size. It tends to go the other way. It evolves in terms of creating more phases, okay? And then adding and looking at it in terms of a process and adding, decision points, and, it becomes a process map.
The checklist grows.
There you go.
Every
There
year,
you go.
lessons learned,
Okay.
let's add that to the checklist.
Yeah. Oh, we need to,
Yeah.
we forgot this, so let's add it. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. So it sort of takes on its own life, right? So we focus on this and trying to improve the process just by making it more complicated. Really. And so why do you think that happens?
Because some steps are sometimes missed, and as Jeff said, the lessons learned are added onto the gates, and then 5 years later, they say, oh, we have a new process, which is basically going back to the one 5 years before. They give it a different name.
Right.
I think it's pretty much the same thing. There's a desire, a good, well-intentioned desire to improve the process.
Right.
And rarely is cutting a gate seen as an improvement,
Right.
It's
Okay.
like stop signs, they come up and don't go down. So,
Very true, huh? We'll add a stop sign and it'll slow people down,
yeah,
right?
I've also seen that the size and complexity of the gates increase over
Yes.
time. Like the number and the seniority, I guess, of people that need to approve tends to increase over time, right? And that slows people down as well. And it's usually in response to either something has been missed, there's been a problem, and this is a heavy-handed way to fix the problem, or to ensure it doesn't happen again, or an executive gets their nose at a joint because they weren't invited to a meeting or something.
Okay, good point.
We did, I think for us, they did come up with like models, because you have the full-blown one for like designing a space shuttle.
Right, yeah.
Where you wanna make sure that everything is checked.
Yep.
But you can't, it's very heavy, so they said if it's a small product, I think they call it ABC, or small, medium, large, like a small may combine and remove some of the qualifiers or something like that.
They did